The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems before anyone noticed something was terribly wrong. Ambassador of the Confederation pressed his delicate, crystalline fingers against the communication console, his bioluminescent patches flickering with anxiety. The distress call had been meant for the nearby patrol fleet, a routine request for assistance with mechanical failures on their diplomatic vessel. Instead, something else entirely had responded. "Ambassador, we're receiving an incoming transmission," reported Communications Officer Ara, her voice trembling through her translator unit. "The signature doesn't match any known Confederation vessel." His elongated head tilted as he studied the readings. They were a peaceful species, evolved on a garden world where the greatest natural threat was seasonal storms. Their entire civilization had developed around diplomacy, art, and scientific advancement. Violence was so foreign to their nature that their language had 17 different words for peaceful resolution, but no direct translation for weapon. "Perhaps it's in ship with updated transponders," suggested hopefully. "Open the channel." The main flickered to life, revealing a face that made every on the bridge instinctively step backward. The creature was bipedal like themselves, but where they were graceful and ethereal, this being was solid, muscular, and intimidating. Its skin was a strange pinkish color, covered partially by what appeared to be some form of artificial hide. Most unsettling were its eyes, small, dark, and predatory, set in a face that showed clear signs of evolutionary adaptation for violence. "This is Captain Sarah of the Terran Defense Force vessel Indomitable," the creature spoke, its voice rough and commanding. "We received your distress call and are en route to your position. What is the nature of your emergency?" Exchanged panicked glances with his crew. Terran? The name wasn't in any of their databases. The Confederation maintained detailed records of every spacefaring species in their sector, yet these Terrans were completely unknown. We struggled to find words. "Forgive me, Captain, but we are not familiar with your species. Our call was intended for Confederation forces." The human's expression changed slightly, what couldn't recognize as mild amusement crossing her features. "I understand the confusion, but we're the closest response team to your location. Our long-range sensors indicate you're experiencing critical system failures. Do you require immediate assistance?" Before could respond, Chief Engineer rushed onto the bridge, his normally pristine robes singed and his patches flashing in distress. "Ambassador, the antimatter containment is destabilizing. We have perhaps 30 minutes before complete failure." The human captain's demeanor immediately shifted to one of focused intensity. "Antimatter containment failure? That's a Category 1 emergency. We're accelerating to maximum velocity. Prepare to receive our engineering team." "Captain, while we appreciate your offer," began carefully, "our technology may not be compatible with yours. Perhaps it would be better to wait for—" "With respect, Ambassador," the human interrupted, "antimatter doesn't care about diplomatic protocol. When that containment fails, it'll take out everything within a 50-kilometer radius. We'll be at your position in 18 minutes. The channel closed, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Had never encountered such directness, such casual assumption of authority. In Confederation space, such matters would require at least 3 committee meetings and a formal vote before any action could be taken. "Sir," Ara whispered, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures approaching, multiple vessels heavily armed." Felt his bioluminescent patches dim with fear. "How many ships?" 15, no, 2037 vessels and counting, she reported, her voice rising with each number. "Ambassador, they're not just coming to help, they're coming in force." Through the space itself seemed to bend as the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The ships were unlike anything in Confederation space, angular, aggressive, bristling with what could only be weapon systems. They moved with predatory grace, taking defensive positions around the vessel with military precision that spoke of countless battles. The largest ship, presumably the Indomitable, positioned itself directly alongside their vessel. It was 3 times the size of their diplomatic craft, its hull and reinforced in ways that suggested it had seen considerable combat. Strange markings covered its surface. Some appeared to be numbers and letters, others looked almost like primitive artwork depicting various creatures and symbols. "This is Captain, we're extending a docking tube. Prepare to receive our engineering team. And Ambassador." The human's voice carried a note of something couldn't identify. "You might want to have your people stay out of their way. Humans work differently than most species. Before could ask what she meant, the docking tube sealed against their hull with a resonant clang that vibrated through their entire ship. Moments later, the airlock cycled, and the humans entered. Had thought Captain was intimidating but seeing humans in person was an entirely different experience. They moved with controlled aggression, every step purposeful and powerful. Their leader, a massive human with arms covered in strange markings that would later learn were called tattoos, carried tools that looked more like weapons than engineering equipment. Chief Petty Officer Terran Defense Force Engineering Corps, the human announced, his voice booming through their translator system. Where's your antimatter containment? Chief Engineer pointed toward the rear of the ship with a trembling appendage. The containment chamber is through the tertiary corridor, but you must understand our systems are quite delicate. Perhaps if we could convene a meeting to discuss. The human engineer was already moving, followed by his team. No time for meetings. Show me the problem, or we're all going to be very pretty space dust in about 20 minutes. As they rushed through the ship's corridors, observed the humans with growing fascination and terror. They moved like predators, constantly alert, their eyes scanning everything around them with an intensity that suggested they expected danger at any moment. Their technology was crude compared to Confederation standards, bulky, and built to survive damage rather than prevent it. In the engineering section, Chief took one look at the failing containment system and let out what could only be described as a predatory smile. Well, that's interesting. Your antimatter bottle is cracking along the quantum substrate. Elegant solution, whoever designed this, but not very robust. He turned to his team, shouting orders in rapid-fire military language that the translators struggled to keep up with. The humans swarmed over the equipment like organized chaos, bypassing safety protocols and implementing fixes that made gasp in horror. You can't just reroute the primary conduit without running a full diagnostic, protested. Watch me, replied, his hands already deep in the machinery. Hand me that plasma welder, start bypassing those safety interlocks. Martinez, I need you to hold this steady while I weld it in place. What followed was perhaps the most terrifying display of engineering had ever witnessed. The humans worked with tools that seemed designed for destruction rather than creation, cutting and welding, and rebuilding the delicate containment system with brutal efficiency. They argued loudly among themselves, using words that the translator marked as inappropriate for diplomatic channels. Yet somehow their chaotic method produced results. There, announced 15 minutes later, wiping some form of industrial lubricant from his hands. Your antimatter bottle is now contained within a Type 7 Terran emergency housing. It's not pretty, but it'll hold until you can get to a proper shipyard. Stared at the repair in shock. The humans had essentially built a cage around their failing system, crude, inelegant, but undeniably effective. The containment readings were not only stable, but actually better than they had been before the malfunction. How did you? He began, then stopped. Your species, you've dealt with antimatter containment failures before. The human team exchanged looks that was beginning to recognize as their version of amusement. Kid, said, where we come from, if it can explode, it probably has. We've learned to fix things fast or die trying. As the humans prepared to return to their ship, Captain's voice crackled through the communication system. Ambassador, your engineering crisis has been resolved. However, I think we need to talk. It seems there's been some confusion about who exactly answered your distress call. Back on the bridge, facing the human captain's image on their screen, felt as though his entire understanding of the galaxy had shifted. Captain, I must ask, are your people new to space travel? Your ships, your technology, your methods? They're unlike anything in our databases. The human's expression grew thoughtful. Ambassador, how long has your Confederation been active in this sector? Nearly 8,000 years, replied with some pride. We've contacted every spacefaring species within 50 light years. Interesting, mused. Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know about? The term was unfamiliar and said as much. The human captain's smile was not entirely reassuring. An ambassador is a planet where everything tries to kill you, where the weather can destroy cities, where the wildlife treats intelligence as just another item on the menu, where survival requires constant vigilance and adaptation. Most spacefaring species evolved on garden worlds like yours, safe, predictable, peaceful. She paused, and when she continued, Her voice carried a note of something that made Patches flicker nervously. Humans come from Earth, and Earth, Ambassador, is about as it gets. We didn't develop space travel to explore or trade or make friends. We developed it because staying on one planet seemed like putting all our eggs in a very dangerous basket. Processed this information with growing unease. Captain, are you saying that your species evolved under conditions of constant threat? That's exactly what I'm saying. And Ambassador, when you sent out that distress call, it didn't just reach Confederation space. It reached beyond your borders into what you might call the frontier regions. Out there, it's not all diplomatic meetings and peaceful trade negotiations. The implications struck like a physical blow. You're saying there are other species like yours. The human captain's smile became distinctly predatory. Ambassador, we're probably the friendliest species you're going to meet from the frontier regions. And right now, your distress call is still broadcasting across 17 star systems, most of which are outside Confederation space. As if summoned by her words, the sensor operator's voice cut across the bridge. Ambassador, multiple new contacts approaching, energy signatures unknown, configuration, aggressive. Through the new shapes began to materialize from the darkness of space. These vessels were even more alien than the human ships, monstrosities that seemed to pulse with malevolent life, their surfaces covered in what looked like armor plating and weapons that easy categorization. Well, Captain's voice came through the comm system, now carrying a tone of grim satisfaction. Looks like the neighborhood just got a lot more interesting. Ambassador, I strongly suggest you and your crew transfer to our ships immediately. Why managed to ask, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. Because those ships belong to the swarm, and they have a very simple philosophy about other species, the human replied. Either you're useful to them as slaves, or you're useful to them as food. Either way, you stop being useful pretty quickly. The human fleet was already moving, their ships spreading into what was beginning to recognize as a battle formation. Weapons systems that had seemed excessive for a rescue mission suddenly appeared barely adequate for what was approaching. Captain said quietly, "How many ships are coming?" "Current count shows 47 vessels," she replied with calm professionalism. "They're bringing a full hunt pack. The good news is that they probably don't know we're here yet." And the bad news. The human captain's grin was visible even through the static of the transmission. The bad news, Ambassador, is that they're about to learn what happens when answer a distress call instead of the cavalry. Transfer to the human vessel happened faster than thought possible. Within minutes, every aboard their diplomatic ship found themselves in the corridors of the Indomitable, surrounded by humans who moved with the efficiency of a species that had turned survival into an art form. The contrast was overwhelming. Where ships were designed for comfort and aesthetic beauty, human vessels felt like weapons that happened to have life support systems. Ambassador stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching through the main as the approaching fleet grew larger. The ships moved with an organic fluidity that made his skin crawl, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to shift and change like living tissue. Worst of all were the sounds. Even through the vacuum of space, some form of energy transmission carried what could only be described as hunting calls, predatory vocalizations that spoke of ancient hunger and endless appetite. "Fascinating," Chief Science Officer whispered beside him. "Their ships appear to be grown rather than built. The power signatures suggest a hybrid biological-technological approach that—" "Doctor," Captain interrupted without looking away from her tactical displays. "I appreciate scientific curiosity, but right now those ships are preparing to turn us all into lunch. Save the analysis for after we survive the next hour." The bridge around them hummed with controlled activity. Human crew members worked at stations that looked more like military command centers than anything had seen on Confederation vessels. Multiple screens showed tactical information, weapon statuses, and ship positions with a level of detail that suggested these humans had spent considerable time thinking about combat scenarios. "Captain," reported a human at the tactical station, "they are moving into standard hunt formation. Looks like they're planning to surround us and compress inward." "Standard response to that pattern?" asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Break their formation before they can complete it," came the immediate reply from multiple crew members simultaneously. Felt his bioluminescent patches flicker with confusion. Captain, surely there must be some way to communicate with these. In the Confederation, all disputes are resolved through diplomatic channels. Perhaps if we transmitted our peaceful intentions. The human captain turned to look at him and saw something in her eyes that he would later recognize as pity. Ambassador, the don't do diplomacy. Their language has exactly three concepts for dealing with other species: hunt, capture, or consume. They're not here to negotiate. But surely any intelligent species can be reasoned with, persisted. There must be common ground, shared interests. His words were cut off as the main exploded with light. The fleet had opened fire, sending streams of what appeared to be living energy toward the human formation. The weapons struck the lead human vessel and watched in horror as sections of its hull were simply dissolved, consumed by the alien attack. Evasive maneuvers, commanded. All ships pattern Delta 7, time to show these bugs why you don't hunt apex predators. The human fleet moved like a single organism, but where the flowed like water, the humans struck like lightning. Their ships dove and rolled with an aggressiveness that the elegant tactics taught in Confederation military academies. Weapon systems that had seemed oversized for their vessels now revealed their purpose as streams of kinetic projectiles and energy beams lanced out toward the alien formation. What followed was unlike anything in experience or education. The humans didn't just fight, they hunted. Where Confederation tactics emphasized defensive positioning and gradual advantage building, human strategy seemed to revolve around controlled aggression and overwhelming force applied at precisely the right moment. Target their lead bioship's neural cluster, commanded. I want a spread of quantum torpedoes on that formation. Martinez, bring us around for a strafing run on their flank. The bridge erupted with activity as the humans implemented their captain's orders with mechanical precision. Watched tactical displays that showed the human fleet carving through formations like predators scattering prey animals. Yet what struck him most was not the violence, but the coordination. These humans worked together with an instinctive understanding that spoke of deep evolutionary programming. How do they do that? Chief Engineer whispered in amazement. They're operating as a perfect unit without constant communication. One of the human officers overheard him. Pack hunting instincts, sir. When you evolve chasing megafauna across African plains, you learn to coordinate without words. Add military training and modern technology and you get something that most species find unsettling. The battle raged across space, with human vessels weaving between ships like fighters engaging bombers, but began to notice something that chilled him more than the violence itself. The humans were learning. With each exchange of fire, their tactics adapted. They identified weak points in formations, exploited gaps in their coordination, and systematically dismantled what had seemed like an overwhelming force. Captain, the tactical officer reported, we've broken their primary formation. 17 enemy vessels destroyed, 12 more showing critical damage. Casualties on our side? Asked. 3 ships with moderate damage, 1 requiring assistance. No losses. Stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The human fleet had not only survived the assault, but was systematically destroying a force larger than their own. How is this possible? He whispered. Captain heard him. Ambassador, they are hunters, but they're used to hunting prey. They've developed tactics for chasing down fleeing victims and overwhelming static defenses. They've never had to deal with something that hunts back. As if responding to her words, the formation began to shift, their ships pulling back into a defensive configuration. The hunting calls that had filled the communication channels changed tone, becoming something that even through the translation system sounded like confusion and growing fear. They're regrouping, the tactical officer observed. Looks like they're trying to withdraw to long-range engagement distance. Negative, replied immediately. All ships pursue and engage. We don't give predators a chance to regroup and call for reinforcements. The human fleet surged forward, their vessels moving with the relentless determination of persistence hunters. Found himself thinking of documentaries he had seen about Earth wildlife, images of predators pursuing prey across vast distances with inexorable patience. The humans were applying the same principles to space combat, refusing to allow their enemies any respite or opportunity to reorganize. Captain said quietly, in Confederation space, once an enemy begins retreating, it's customary to allow them to withdraw. It prevents unnecessary casualties and opens the possibility for future diplomatic resolution. The human captain's expression was not unkind, but it carried the weight of hard-earned experience. Ambassador, predators like the don't understand mercy. If you let them go, they don't learn to leave you alone. They learn that you're weak enough to be attacked again with better preparation. She gestured toward the tactical display where the remaining ships were beginning to scatter in different directions. Right now, they're confused and disorganized. In 6 months, they'll return with a fleet 3 times this size and a better understanding of human capabilities. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is make sure the lesson sticks the first time. The human pursuit was methodical and thorough. Ship after ship fell to coordinated attacks that seemed to anticipate every evasive maneuver they attempted. The aliens' bioships, so terrifying when attacking, proved vulnerable when forced to defend themselves. Their organic hulls, evolved for offense and rapid healing, couldn't adapt quickly enough to the variety of human weapon systems. Final vessel destroyed, the tactical officer reported. Space is clear of hostile contacts. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Stared at the now empty space where moments before a powerful alien fleet had threatened their existence. The efficiency of the human response left him struggling to process what he had witnessed. "Captain," he said slowly, "your fleet destroyed an entire hunting pack in less than 30 minutes. Actually 23 minutes, corrected. Not bad for a first contact scenario, but we'll need to do better if we run into their main fleet." "Their main fleet," his voice cracked slightly. "There are more of them." The human captain nodded grimly. "The swarm controls about 40 star systems in the frontier regions. What you just saw was a reconnaissance force, probably responding to your distress call to see if they could pick up some easy prey. The real threat comes when they decide a system is worth invading properly." She turned to address the assembled directly. "Ambassador, I think it's time you understood something about the galaxy beyond your Confederation borders. Out in the frontier regions, it's not all peaceful exploration and diplomatic first contact. Species like the Horde, the Machine Collective, they don't share your values about peaceful coexistence." Felt as though the fundamental assumptions of his worldview were crumbling. "But the Galactic Council, the peace treaties, the frameworks for cooperation only work when all parties involved value peace above expansion," interrupted gently. "The species in your confederation developed in relatively safe environments. You had the luxury of evolving cooperative behaviors because cooperation was rewarded. Out here, cooperation gets you eaten." She gestured toward the main, where the human fleet was reforming into a loose patrol formation. "Humans, and the other species in the frontier regions, evolved under different rules. We learned cooperation too, but we learned it as a survival mechanism for dealing with threats too big for individuals to handle alone." "Other species?" asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. "Humans aren't unique, Ambassador. Earth is harsh, but it's not the harshest world that's produced intelligent life. There are species out here that make us look like pacifists." Smile held no humor. "The good news is that most of them have learned to work together rather than fight each other. The bad news is that your distress call didn't just reach human space." As if summoned by her words, the sensor station erupted with new contacts. "Captain, detecting new arrivals, multiple fleets approaching from different vectors." The main shifted to show space that had been empty moments before now filled with vessels of wildly different designs. Some ships looked like mechanical insects, their hulls covered in what appeared to be natural armor plating. Others resembled geometric crystals that twisted and folded in ways that hurt to look at directly. A third group appeared to be constructed from some form of living metal that flowed and shifted like liquid while maintaining structural integrity. "Well," Captain said with what was beginning to recognize as typical human understatement, "looks like word has gotten around. Ambassador, you're about to get an education in frontier region politics." One by one, new voices crackled through the communication system, each speaking in languages that strained the translation systems to their limits. The mechanical voices of what identified as the Combine spoke in mathematical that somehow conveyed meaning. The harmonious tones of the symphonic collective seemed to sing their communications in ways that bypassed language entirely. Most unsettling were the voices of the, which seemed to whisper directly into the minds of listeners without using sound at all. "This is of the Combine. Human vessels explain your presence in this sector." Conductor Prime of the Symphonic Collective acknowledges human fleet. Query: status of biomechanical contamination. The observe, the humans hunt well, the prey species learns or dies. Captain responded to each contact with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the crisis. This is Captain Sarah, Terran Defense Force. We responded to a distress call from the diplomatic vessel. The threat has been neutralized. The response from the alien fleets was immediate and coordinated. The mechanical voices of the Combine transmitted what could only be approval. The symphonic collective's harmonic tones shifted to what the translator identified as satisfaction. Most surprisingly, the whispers of the carried what seemed to be respect. The humans acted appropriately, the voice echoed in their minds. The swarm spawn threat is contained. The prey species survives to learn caution. Found himself staring at tactical displays showing dozens of alien vessels, each representing species unknown to Confederation science, all apparently arriving in response to their distress call. Captain, how many species are there in the frontier regions? Currently, about 37 that we maintain regular contact with, replied. Maybe a dozen more that we know exist but haven't established formal relationships with, and probably half again as many that we haven't discovered yet. The implications staggered him. You're saying there's an entire galactic community that the Confederation knows nothing about. Not exactly a community, corrected. More like a mutual defense network. Most of us learned pretty quickly that working together was more effective than fighting each other, especially when there are threats like the swarm that target any form of intelligent life. She gestured toward the assembled fleets on the. What you're looking at, Ambassador, is the reason species like the haven't overrun this entire sector. When one of us gets in trouble, the others respond. Not out of altruism necessarily, but because we've all learned that threats to any of us eventually become threats to all of us. The communication system crackled with new transmissions as the various fleet commanders coordinated their response. Listened in growing amazement as military leaders from completely different evolutionary backgrounds worked together with an efficiency that put Confederation committee meetings to shame. This is Captain. Recommend establishing patrol perimeters to monitor for additional activity. Acknowledged, Captain. Vessels will monitor dimensional boundary layers. Swarm spawn frequently use alternative spacetime approaches. Conductor Prime suggests harmonic scanning protocols, the Symphonic Collective's representative added. Biomechanical entities produce distinctive resonance patterns across multiple dimensional frequencies. They will monitor the deep spaces, the whispered voice added. Where light fails, we see clearly. As the various fleets moved into coordinated positions around the area, realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in his experience. Dozens of alien species working together not because they shared common values or philosophical frameworks, but because they had learned through hard experience that cooperation was essential for survival. Captain, he said quietly, your people and these other species, you've built an alliance without formal treaties or governmental structures. The human captain nodded. Out here, your word is your bond because breaking it gets people killed. We don't need committees and bureaucracies because the consequences of failure are immediate and obvious. She turned to face him directly. Ambassador, your Confederation is going to need to make some decisions. Your space borders the frontier regions, and what happened today is just the beginning. The galaxy is bigger and more dangerous than your people have realized. 3 weeks after the incident that would later be known as the Frontier Response Event, Ambassador found himself standing in the Grand Assembly Chamber of the Confederation, facing a council that seemed unable to comprehend the magnitude of what he was reporting. The chamber's crystal walls reflected his bioluminescent patches as they flickered with nervous energy, casting strange patterns across the faces of the assembled representatives. Ambassador, spoke High Counselor, her voice carrying the weight of 8,000 years of peaceful tradition, you are asking us to believe that there exists an entire network of spacefaring species that we have never encountered, and that these species regularly engage in military activities. Activated the holographic display that showed the tactical recordings from the Indomitable. The assembled counselors watched in silence as human vessels tore through formations with mechanical precision. Several representatives visibly recoiled when the display showed the destruction of the bioships, their crystalline features expressing distaste at the violence. "The evidence is undeniable," said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Beyond our borders lies a region where peaceful species like ourselves would not survive without protection. The humans and their allies have offered to establish what they call protective protocols for Confederation space." Counselor of the Science Directorate raised her delicate hand. "Ambassador, these humans you describe, their methods seem fundamentally incompatible with our values. You speak of weapons designed for destruction, tactics based on predatory behavior, ships built for war rather than exploration. How can we trust such beings?" Before could respond, the chamber's communication system activated with an incoming transmission request. The identifier showed it was from the human vessel that remained stationed at the edge of Confederation space, a diplomatic courtesy that had been the subject of heated debate among the Council. "High Counselor," said carefully, "Captain requested permission to address the Council directly. Perhaps hearing from her would clarify the situation." Patches flickered with uncertainty. "Very well, but this human must understand that our ways are peaceful and any aggressive behavior will not be tolerated." The holographic projector activated, showing Captain standing on what appeared to be the bridge of her vessel. Behind her, could see human crew members working at their stations with the focused efficiency he had come to associate with their species. Wore what she had explained was a formal diplomatic uniform, though even this looked more military than anything in Confederation experience. "High Counselor," began, her voice respectful but direct, "I understand your concerns about our methods and our intentions. In your position, I would have the same questions." Inclined her head slightly. "Captain, Ambassador has presented us with information that challenges our fundamental understanding of galactic civilization. You claim that peaceful coexistence with all species is not always possible." "With respect, High Counselor, I'm not claiming anything," replied. "I'm reporting observable facts. In the 3 weeks since our first contact, our monitoring stations have detected 17 separate scout incursions into systems bordering Confederation space. They're testing your defenses, mapping your trade routes, and assessing your military capabilities." She gestured, and her own holographic display activated, showing sensor data that made several counselors gasp. The readings clearly showed alien vessels moving through space that the Confederation considered secure, their biomechanical signatures matching the ships from the original encounter. "The reality, High Counselor, is that your Confederation has remained peaceful because you've been isolated. Your borders have been protected by distance and by the frontier species who've been fighting threats like for generations. That isolation is ending." Counselor of the Trade Directorate leaned forward. "Captain, assuming your information is accurate, what exactly are you proposing? That we abandon our peaceful principles and become warriors like yourselves?" His expression softened slightly. "Not at all, Counselor. The galaxy needs peaceful species like yours. Your art, your science, your diplomatic traditions. These things have value that goes beyond mere survival. What I'm proposing is that you allow those of us who are adapted for conflict to handle the ugly necessities, while you continue to do what you do best." "And what would you require in return?" asked, her tone carrying the careful neutrality that had served the Confederation well in internal negotiations. "Technology exchange, safe harbor for our vessels when needed, and assistance with logistics," replied immediately. "We're not interested in conquest or control. We're interested in creating a stable region where peaceful species can develop and thrive." The council chamber erupted in quiet discussion as representatives conferred in small groups. Watched their bioluminescent patterns, reading the subtle communications that indicated deep uncertainty mixed with pragmatic recognition of their situation. "Captain," called out Counselor Ara from the Exploration Directorate, "you speak of other species in your alliance. How do we know that they share your relatively benevolent intentions?" The human captain smiled, and for the first time saw genuine warmth in the expression. "An excellent question, Counselor. Rather than tell you about them, would you prefer to meet some of them directly?" Before anyone could object, 3 additional holographic displays activated around the chamber. The counselors found themselves face-to-face with representatives of species that their understanding of biological possibility. The first figure appeared to be constructed entirely of living crystal that shifted and flowed while maintaining a roughly humanoid shape. When it spoke, the words seemed to resonate directly through the chamber's crystal walls, creating harmonies that were somehow soothing despite their alien nature. "I am Conductor Prime of the Symphonic Collective," the being sang in tones that bypassed the translation system entirely. "We greet the Confederation with harmonic intentions. Your crystalline architecture resonates with frequencies of great beauty." The second hologram showed a creature that looked like a fusion of organic and mechanical components. Its body was clearly biological, but covered in technological enhancements that seemed to grow from rather than be attached to its form. When it moved, the motion was precise and calculated, yet somehow graceful. "Combine," it announced, its voice a carefully modulated series of tones that the translator rendered as mathematical concepts. "Analysis indicates 97.3% probability of beneficial outcomes from frontier cooperation protocols." The third display remained partially obscured, showing only a vague outline that seemed to shift between dimensions. When this being spoke, its words appeared directly in the minds of everyone present, carrying overtones of vast loneliness and unexpected gentleness. "Greet the Crystal Singers," the voice whispered. "In the deep spaces between stars, we have watched your light. It is pleasant." Watched his fellow counselors struggle to process these first contacts. Each species was so fundamentally different from biology and psychology that meaningful communication seemed impossible. Yet somehow, it was happening. "Conductor Prime," said carefully, "your people, do you engage in military activities like the humans?" The crystalline being's form shifted to what might have been amusement. "We sing the stars into different patterns when necessary, yes, but we prefer to harmonize with willing partners. The death songs are for those who refuse all other melodies." Its mechanical components whirred softly. "Combine optimizes survival probability through strategic application of force when diplomatic parameters fail. Violence is inefficient but sometimes mathematically required." The representative remained silent for a moment before its words formed in their minds. "We exist in spaces where physics becomes flexible. When necessary, we ensure that those who would harm others find themselves lost in dimensions that do not welcome them." Counselor raised a trembling hand. "These beings speak of violence as though it were a simple tool to be used when convenient. How can we trust such alien thinking?" Captain stepped forward in her hologram. "Counselor, you're approaching this from the perspective of species that never had to fight for survival on the evolutionary level. For us, and for our allies, violence isn't preferred. It's simply one option among many for solving problems. We've learned to use it precisely because we understand its costs." She gestured toward her alien colleagues. "Each of these species has unique capabilities that make them nearly impossible to defeat in their areas of expertise. The Symphonic Collective can manipulate matter at the quantum level through harmonic resonance. The Combine can calculate probability matrices that let them predict and counter almost any tactical approach. They can phase ships and weapons through dimensional barriers." "And humans?" asked quietly. "Humans are persistence hunters and pattern adapters," replied. "We're very good at learning how other species think and fight, then developing counters to their advantages. We're also exceptionally good at coordinating with other species because we evolved in multi-predator environments where cooperation was essential." The chamber fell silent as the counselors absorbed this information. Finally, Counselor spoke. "Captain, assuming we were to agree to some form of cooperation, what would this look like in practical terms?" Activated another display, showing a three-dimensional map of local space. "We'd establish monitoring stations at key points along your borders. These would be staffed jointly by frontier species and operated according to protocols that respect Confederation sovereignty. We'd also create rapid response teams that could deal with incursions like the before they became threats to your civilian populations." "In exchange," Conductor Prime added in its singing voice, "we would appreciate access to your crystalline technology. Our own harmonic amplification systems could benefit from the resonance properties of crystal matrices." Its mechanical components clicked in what might have been agreement. "Combine requests access to computational substrates. Your biological processors demonstrate interesting quantum coherence properties that could enhance our calculation efficiency." This mental voice was softer than before. "We ask only for understanding. So few species can comprehend existence in non-standard dimensions. Your people's natural crystal resonance might help bridge the gap between dimensional states. Watched as understanding dawned across the faces of his colleagues. These alien species weren't interested in conquest or exploitation. They were offering to trade their military protection for access to Confederation technology and knowledge that would benefit everyone involved. High Counselor said formally, I recommend that we establish a trial cooperation period. The benefits of frontier protection clearly outweigh the risks, and these species have demonstrated both capability and trustworthiness. Its bioluminescent patches flickered in the complex pattern that indicated deep thought. Around the chamber, other counselors showed similar signs of serious consideration. Captain, she said finally, if we were to agree to this arrangement, how would disputes be resolved? Our experience suggests that military-focused species might use force to settle disagreements. The human captain's smile was understanding. High Counselor, species that survive by fighting external threats quickly learn that fighting among themselves is counterproductive. Our alliance works because we've developed arbitration protocols that recognize each species' unique needs and capabilities. The harmony of cooperation, Conductor Prime sang, produces more beautiful results than the discord of conflict. Mathematically, added, internal conflict reduces efficiency below survival thresholds. This mental voice carried a note of ancient wisdom. In the spaces between dimensions, there is room for all forms of existence. Conflict arises only when beings refuse to acknowledge this truth. As the discussion continued, found himself thinking about the ships that had been destroyed in those first 23 minutes of contact. The violence had been swift, efficient, and absolutely necessary. But it had also been followed by immediate offers of assistance, genuine respect for Confederation values, and a clear desire for peaceful cooperation. Perhaps, he thought, there was a difference between beings who used violence because they enjoyed it and beings who used violence because they understood its necessity. The frontier species had clearly learned to be warriors not because they loved war, but because they loved peace enough to fight for it. High Counselor, he said aloud, I believe these species offer us something we've never had before, the luxury of remaining peaceful while others handle the unglamorous task of ensuring our peace is respected by those who would destroy it. The vote, when it came, was closer than had hoped but more decisive than he had feared. The Confederation would join the Frontier Alliance, contributing their unique technologies while accepting the protection of species better adapted for conflict. As the Council session ended and the holographic projections of their new allies faded away, Captain's image remained for a moment longer. Ambassador, she said quietly, welcome to the neighborhood. I think you're going to find it's a lot bigger and more interesting than you ever imagined. Outside the crystal walls of the council chamber, space itself seemed different now that understood what lay beyond the borders of Confederation knowledge. Somewhere out there, human vessels patrolled alongside crystalline ships that sang to the stars, mechanical entities that calculated the paths of probability, and beings that existed in the spaces between realities. The galaxy had become a far more complex and dangerous place than the Confederation had ever realized. But it had also become a place where peaceful species could thrive under the protection of those who understood that sometimes the greatest kindness was the willingness to be absolutely ruthless in defense of those who could not defend themselves.